It'll only be like 15 seconds, don't worry.
All right. Okay, there we go. Yeah, it started.
Nice. Hey there, everybody.
All right. So, yeah. I actually have no idea how to introduce this stream.
I don't know. We could just talk about some things that happened. You guys here? Well, I'm pretty sure this is on everybody's mind, so we could talk about this. Did you hear about Ron Paul having a stroke live on stream?
Yeah, I did hear about that. That's I mean, that's pretty rough. I don't really
Yeah,
wish physical injury on him.
of course not. That's not where I was going with that. It's something that's interesting for sure. I've been pretty critical of Ron Paul in the past. Specifically, I see him as being like one of the major subverting figures in the libertarian movement, like up there with Hoppe. He is essentially the reason why 75% at least of the people identify themselves as libertarians. And that's just sort of, if I were to try and create an estimate, think of themselves as libertarians because they have a quote unquote originalist interpretation of the Constitution.
It goes without saying that if you're an originalist, if you believe in the Constitution at all, you're not a libertarian. To just clarify, because I had a conversation like hours before the stream with someone else, we define libertarianism as a philosophy that conceptually refutes political rule. And if you believe that a piece of paper legitimately defines or creates legitimacy for a government, then chances are you're not a libertarian, and which is exactly what Ron Paul does. He just basically takes Republicans or even libertarians and subverts it, makes them believe that if you're going to be a true libertarian, well, you got to recognize the United States Constitution as completely good, legitimate, moral, and just, even though under the Constitution it is perfectly legitimate for the government to do things like declare war, to take your money, do all sorts of other criminal activity, and all of it is completely authorized under it. I mean, slavery is actually still authorized under the United States Constitution. All that needs to happen for you to literally be enslaved by your government is for them to arbitrarily define you as having violated one of the various forms of legislation that said Constitution authorizes the legislative branch of Congress to pass.
One of the major issues with the idea of constitutionalism, and that is there really is no originalist interpretation. There's no sort of defined interpretation, even by the people who wrote the Constitution. You know, that's why there were different factions of the First or Second Continental Congress, and that's another thing. Some of these so-called originalists look at the Second Continental Congress. Some of them look at the first. Some of them look at the revolutionary movement prior to the colonial government even being recognized as independent from Britain. So that's another thing, is what exactly are we considering originalist, aside from the fact that there isn't a sort of uniform way to interpret laws from a centralized monopoly arbiter, because all the concepts referenced by laws, like speech, freedom, property, etc., just to name a few of the vast many, are all essentially just up for interpretation in terms of what they mean by whatever judge happens to be ruling over a dispute. So, in essence, legal decrees are nothing more than opinions. But what I was, aside from that problem, there's no there is no informed originalist take, or even if there was, there would be no way definitively to say that this is the correct way that the Constitution should be quote unquote interpreted. Why exactly is the originalist interpretation more valid than someone who would disagree with that?
hmm And you said it earlier, like the way that the originalists would try to define originalism, is as interpreting the Constitution the way the founders wrote it, or as the founders intended. However, because they're dead, we can't ask them what their original intent is. Furthermore, there are various writings that were made about the Constitution. Well, they weren't exactly entirely sure how certain things ought to be interpreted either. And that was quite a bit of the conflict between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, two different factions with varying ideas as to what the Constitution means as written, all coming to completely different interpretations as to what this means, what it could mean, and what are the implications. It goes without saying that there is no such thing as an objective way to interpret anything. And this is even kind of a thing in fiction writing as well. I'm pretty sure you've all heard of death of the author. This isn't referring to like the actual physical death of the person who wrote it, but it's simply an observation that the author's interpretation of their own work is no more or less valid than any reader's interpretation. So with this in mind,
Sort of.
you're not going to
Why?
be able to get a sorry, I wasn't quite finished. You're not going to be able to
Okay.
get a single simple interpretation. There's no holy doctrine that's passed down, and even if there was, well, how are people going to interpret that doctrine?
But and this is sort of just what I was getting into earlier. It's also really funny that a lot of these originalists, so called, actually don't like they reference the perspectives of people like Thomas Jefferson, or at the very least things that they would have said. They don't actually know what their position is. For instance, the like boomer Republican position, they reference Thomas Jefferson as a originalist to inform the originalist perspective of the Constitution. In reality, what Thomas Jefferson, a lot of the things that he was a proponent of would be like they would consider pretty divorced from their own position. For instance, Thomas Jefferson was a proponent, supposedly. If we were to take what he said at face value, of the idea that there shouldn't actually be a standing military or police. He took inspiration from um, a neo-Republican by the name, I think, of James. I is probably wrong, but James Patterson, who was a proponent of the people being the police for the state because they have a vested interest in protecting their nation. But another problem as well, and this is sort of what I was getting into earlier, is I think it's also pretty funny that for this reason, a lot of these people cite having monopoly arbitration. You particularly get this from like the Randian crowd. You need a monopoly arbiter in order to have any sort of law. That is the funny part about that, though, is because you have a monopoly arbiter, you will never have that. You need decentralized arbitration, and an approach to law which is not like prescriptive policy oriented, but instead is an emergent property of people organizing in order to even come close to being able to respect property norms and human rights. If that wasn't the case, then why do you even need a Supreme Court? Why do you even need courts if the presence of the monopoly law, rule of law, was itself objective, or created a sort of code that people followed uniformly?
Well, circling back to what this was originally about, it just showcases the incoherence and inconsistency of libertarianism, of that form of libertarianism, so-called libertarianism, and how it's fundamentally divorced from what libertarianism actually means. So, what Ron Paul has actually done has not been to create a new generation, a new groundswell of libertarians, but to create a groundswell of Libertarian Party voters at best. I mean, I imagine that between Esso and I, we've created far more actual libertarians than Ron Paul has.
That is a fucking spicy take, but it's true. It is absolutely demonstrably true. We have, thousands of viewers, and I'm sure Ron Paul has millions of fans. But the point that Heretic was getting at, and I was going to mention this earlier, is because what Ron Paul is calling libertarianism's not actually libertarianism. You can't really say that Ron Paul has created millions of libertarians. He's just and this is what I will never understand about about the fake libertarianism, the idea that you can have like libertarianism as a policy prescribed by the state. Like, oh, you have people calling themselves libertarians. That means there's more libertarians. No, it just means that you've taken what was once a philosophy. It was like, think of libertarianism as to social organization what the Austrian method is to economics. You've taken that and you've diluted it to the point where it is seen as just another type of prescriptive analysis for society. It's you haven't created more libertarians. You've created a generation of boomer conservatives who think they're libertarians.
And
But with all,
I'm just going to say it's also created the phenomenon of conservatarians. You know about those people, the Republicans who call themselves libertarians, the Glenn Becks.
some of them I don't even know on what grounds they call themselves libertarians. Like Neil Boers is one of those people. He is a radio show host, and he argued on numerous occasions in the early 2000s on air, and these are pretty widely documented. You can find them that that police force should be used to suppress anti-war protests. The extent to, even if you were to assume that libertarianism was some sort of political position, the extent to which these people could even call themselves libertarians is, kind of kind of non-existent. But that's sort of the problem. Is libertarianism is a truth claim about the nature of social organizing, about the nature of society itself. So the idea that these are just arbitrary sort of general ends that can be pursued. No, it's a rejection of politics. It is a rejection of political rule, and you need to have coherent axioms in order to claim these things, because you're not just making some vapid appeal to abstract interest. You're making very specific statements about the nature of reality.
All right. Anyways, I think we should start getting onto the video we were just about to go into. So this comes from.
Yes, we can end that. We can end that by saying, it it made me kind of, it's uncomfortable to see Ron Paul having a stroke, but at the same time, I'm not gonna feign over him as though he is this great libertarian hero. I don't even think he's a bad guy. He probably is a very nice guy. It's why it's so hard to watch him have a stroke. He seems like a decent character, but he's done irreparable harm to the libertarian movement, more so than any of the most vulgar statists ever could.
Don't really have much to add to that. But anyways, just to get into the video, this is from United Nations. What is this? HCR. I actually forget what that stands for.
UT libertarian just means
Human Rights
liberal,
Council, I
fiscally
think.
conservative.
And we got a donation. Thank you, Kojal. He donated $5 and says, "But libertarian just means socially liberal, fiscally conservative."
Yeah, that I don't even know what to say to that. It created a generation of those people, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. I did. This was, of course, before I even called myself a libertarian, let alone an anarchist. But I did run into a lot of people who would just tell me that, oh, libertarian just means fiscally conservative, socially liberal. Yeah, that whole thing is a curse, and I think that's going to be with us for a good amount of time. Anyways, yeah, so this comes from the United Nations Human Rights Council. Sorry.
Sorry? Good thing. I was just going to say, the good thing, though, is that seems to be a dying attitude. The libertarian movement, whether or not you want to point to us as being sort of figures that even influenced this catalyst, which honestly even I would dispute. But there is definitely a growing prevalence of sort of our perspective of libertarianism in the libertarian movement. The notion that libertarianism is, it's an old left philosophy, and it exists as a rebuttal of politics and is inherently skeptical of anything to do with politics, and that's how libertarian ends are achieved.
All right. So, anyways, I was just trying to get into this. So, this comes from apparently the United Nations Human Rights Council, and this is trying to appeal to people's sensibilities about how statelessness is a bad thing. Now, of course, they're going to go into defining statelessness. So I don't really need to. I did actually watch the video before it started, so I have a pretty good idea of what they say. They do go into what that definition means, so I won't waste any time by trying to explain it here. So should I just start?
Yeah.
What?
Why we say, just very quickly, I'm switching out my speakers so that I can have my headphones on and won't create an echo. But why we say that, why we put such emphasis on how they define statelessness is because the topic of the video is probably not what you viewers are probably thinking that it is. It's gonna, you're gonna be thrown a curveball, and it's actually going to be a pretty interesting topic. But hold on a minute.
All right. So
All right,
let's see.
say something. Yes,
I'll say something.
Again.
Yay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play now.
Consider for just 1 minute what it would be like if the country you were born in and had lived your whole life didn't consider you a citizen.
I would actually be perfectly fine with that. The very concept of citizenship, even in regards to states or even in regards to like the history of states, is a relatively recent phenomenon, something that didn't really exist until around like 500 years ago. Before then, you were kind of just there, and unless you were part of an ethnic group that was explicitly prohibited or just generally disliked, everything was just normal. You were basically just a subject. But nowadays, like they changed the term from subject to citizen to insinuate that the class of people in society is somehow elevated, and the term citizen implies some kind of participation in the government. Now, we all know that that's a canard, that you don't actually participate in the government. It's just some lie that they tell you so that you'll be good boys and just do what you're told. But that's the whole
My
point of
take, my take on that a bit later in the video, because what I'm about to say, what they're about to say would allow me to avoid some setup for, what I have to say about that. But what's interesting, though, is like the point of the video is that, there are millions of people who can't prove legally that they're citizens. Here's the thing: the legal criteria for a citizen is entirely arbitrary as well.
Mhm.
There's no such thing as a citizen.
All
It's
right.
essentially just a class that the state created.
Mhm. Anyways, I'm going to keep going. We can get into that a little later as they put forward their definition.
No country did. You belonged nowhere. That is the shocking reality for millions of people who have no nationality. They're stateless. Most people are citizens of somewhere. We have birth certificates, we have passports, we have ID cards, we have driver's license, health cards, documents proving who we are.
I love the extent to which they conflate a person's identity with somehow needing government affirmation of it. Without these
I know.
arbitrary little pieces of paper, somehow you don't exist or you're not a person. We can't prove who you are. Now maybe the state can't prove who you are, but they're gonna have a big uphill battle trying to convince me, anyways, that is somehow a bad thing.
And that's sort of what I was, getting to. That this video is actually, a lot of the stuff that we respond to here on the stream is low hanging fruit, just dumpster fire trash. But this is, I mean, that's what this is if we're going to take it in its intended context as well. What I take away from this is that this is actually it's a decent video to share around to demonstrate just out for one the extent to which the government actually influences your life directly, and how it uses force to do so, like the extent to which the government constructs society using nothing but pure coercion, but also how absolutely disassociated from reality the legal framework that the government attempts to construct is. And it's not to the point where you don't exist if the government doesn't recognize that you exist. Um, and even the government has a hard time documenting your existence in that way. The government needs this to document your existence. That means you don't exist. That is what I mean by that is just that if you try to do things in a lot of aspects of society other than just organizing locally, obviously you're a person, obviously you have a name, obviously you are to contributing to aspects of society, but if you don't have all these quote unquote legal documentations, well, then I guess that's, according to the government, that's not the case. And there have been examples like that one that people were sharing around a few months ago in the Discord of that guy from Romania who was legally considered dead, couldn't prove that he was alive. So the government just continued recognizing he was dead, even though he's obviously not.
He went to court personally to prove that he was not dead, but the judge continued to rule that he was dead, even though he could clearly see that he was neither a corpse nor a zombie. That was yeah, that was absolutely. I remember that was when that first happened. That was freaking hilarious. But it does showcase the extent to which how the government arbitrarily deems personhood by putting people into these categories that they just invent. Previously, people were subjects; now they're citizens. And
That's
the lack
exactly
and
it.
the fact that the government does not recognize certain people as people is clearly being presented to us in the format of this video as though it were some tragedy. They're showing like lines and pictures of people who obviously live in absolute destitution. So we're
That's
obviously they're
sort of,
trying
and that's
to.
exactly it. You see a lot of people like the Bucker Barrelson types complaining about China's social credit system, but at the same time, talking about citizenship standards and approving of that, shilling for that. Well, that's fundamentally what citizenship and legal documentation is. It's so
Hold on a sec.
it is
We got a super chat. Please do not donate through super chat.
right.
Anyways, Pumpkin Road donated $20. The reason that was funky is because I
Nice.
actually did never intended for super chats to be a thing through which we get donations. But anyways, yeah, he says, "Hey guys,
Okay.
sorry I've missed your last few streams. Usually stream when I'm sleeping, and I have to work early in the morning. I just want to let you know don't that I don't love you any less. Also, Hop is my favorite communist." Yeah, so
Yeah, that's a good one.
thank you for the $20, Pumpkin Row. And this is the schedule that best works for us. Hopefully in the future things will start to free up some more, and we might do streams earlier. But for the time
I know
being,
in
yeah,
the
it's the best
future
we can
they
do.
will. I know in the future they will, but I digress for now. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Citizenship standards is just a more it is a form of social credit system in the way that the social credit system is described. However, I'd imagine a lot of statists are uncomfortable thinking about it that way because that gets down to the concept of like the state's influence over society itself. Citizenship is a class that the state creates in order to control how you work, how you do your finances, what car you can like, what types of cars you can drive, or if you can. This is a great example of just the extent to which the state attempts to engineer society, and think that a lot more people should be skeptical of that notion, and I think a lot of people fundamentally are. If you get right down to it, they find the concept of a social credit score to be terrifying. This is fundamentally the exact same thing. What is citizenship if not a type of social credit score?
Naturally. I mean, I think a social credit score is just simply the evolution of citizenship in much the same way that citizenship was an evolution of being a subject. I mean, do you think medieval feudal states or that absolute monarchies were able to keep track of their subjects? No, of course not. By making everything participatory and through improved technology, it was simply more efficient for states to be able to keep track of people individually, not to mention that it would make it a lot harder for people to work off the grid. Whereas if you wanted to get off the grid in a feudal slave state, all you had to do was just leave and not have anyone witness you leaving. So all this is really doing is just moving citizenship into its next stage, where you're going to be graded on how good of a loyal subject you are. This is the same thing. This is what's going on in China right now, and they're already starting to implement it in the United States and other Western countries, mostly in the form of little prototypes like the COVID score and credit. What's the thing? Contact tracing. That's a term. With making sure that people are being good little boys and doing what they're told, that they're not staying out too late, and that they're maintaining 6 feet from other people. And you can imagine that while there's no real consequence to it yet, once things start to actually roll out, you're going to find that your actual credit scores and your ability to get loans, your loans are going to be more expensive. You're not going to be able to take out a loan at all. You're not going to be able to use airports. You're not going to be able to buy or rent an apartment. You're not going to be able to get certain jobs. Your ability to participate in the white market is going to be significantly hamstrung as a result of this, as it is in China right now. So it makes total sense that, well, this is how they're going to start controlling people and start, well, weaponizing citizenship against actual people. And the UN is coming out is the UN is coming at us as though people's ability to be off the grid, to be stateless, and to be otherwise immune from their coercion and control is somehow a bad thing, which I think is the primary motivation by which this video was even made in the first place, because they want it to be some great social crusade to get these demographics involved in this, make them become citizens so they can start paying taxes and being coerced, and being controlled, and being monitored, and being able to do all sorts of the great and wonderful things that all sorts of citizens get to enjoy.
The squalor that these people are made to live in because they don't or simply can't conform to citizenship standards. Shouldn't there be more? Shouldn't we make it easier for people to become citizens, or shouldn't we make that more broadly influential over society? No, you that is such a bullshit little manipulation tactic. Look at these terrible things we've done to you. Doesn't that justify us influencing more aspects of society so that we can continue doing terrible things to you, do more terrible things to you?
I'm just saying, the only reason I would want these groups to become citizens is because I had malicious intent, knowing what I know. You can say that certain people who are going to be influenced by this, who maybe weren't aware of the quote unquote problem previously, but now they've seen this video, it's like, oh my goodness, we need to make gypsies citizens right now. That those people are just uninformed, but I can't think of any other motivation for certainly the person in this video right here. I can't believe that she has good intentions.
And I fundamentally don't think that anybody arguing this could. It's a lot like the argument put forward by proponents of intellectual property when they say, "Oh, well, obviously people have an incentive to do so because the first thing that they do when they make inventions is go to the patent office, or look what happens to people when they don't go to the patent office." Well, that's because the patent system exists. The fact that like it's essentially just this is meant like they're using the terrible things that their system has done as an excuse to manufacture a justification for their system.
Oh my goodness, Daniel Shaver was killed in cold blood. He should have just complied harder.
And that just it kind of pisses me off, but at the same time, I think that a lot more people are becoming skeptical of that kind of reasoning, and that's why you're seeing a lot more skepticism directed towards the state, because the state oftentimes just attempts to forward justifications for its influence over society by doing exactly that. Done these terrible things, now you need us to do more terrible things. I think every time there's a recession that happens, the state trying to claim that there needs to be more intervention in the banking industry, even though that's exactly what caused the recession in the first place, is a great example of that.
Yeah, well, I have some other thoughts, but I'm going to get into those later. Anyways,
But on paper, stateless people simply don't exist. In fact, I can't even tell you how many stateless people there are because over half of all countries don't even count them. Globally, countries that are counting have accounted for nearly 4 million people. But in all likelihood, the actual number is much, much higher. Without a passport or a national ID, the list of things you may not be able to do is never ending. Go to school, see a doctor, own a SIM card, work legally, open a bank account, own or rent a home, even get married.
why is the government involved in any of this? Why is it illegal for people just because they don't have their papers to participate in those industries? I mean, I don't see then again, I don't see a problem with them not being able to go to quote unquote school. So,
Oh, heretic, it's because it's about control. That's the reason those things exist in the first place, and that's the reason why the citizenship standard exists. It's all about control and trying to further the interests of the state, expanding its influence over society.
oh, definitely. And the whole point is to get these people to become citizens specifically so that they can be controlled, they can be coerced, they can be counted, they can be categorized, and they can be taken from. This is a massive inconvenience that people are able to be productive, or at the very least exist outside of their dominion, and I think it drives them crazy. In all honesty, so it goes without saying that
It
this is
definitely does.
yeah, and this
I
is what I was talking about
like
earlier. This is what I was talking about earlier in terms of social credit scores. This is basically how people live. If you're not a good, if you don't citizen hard enough, you just become blacklisted from society as a result of central planners who just dictate that you're not good enough because your behavior is unsatisfactory. It is not fitting to the grand design of your overlords, and thus you need to be removed. So it goes that's
this is
so it
very
kind of yeah. Anyways, go on.
This is a very telling video. It's, something that we should share around to the so-called political libertarians we were talking about earlier, because this creates a great illustration of our point that the legal market is itself largely a construct of the state. The fact that these so-called private firms, even like the state even has the amount of leverage over them to the point that if you don't have a license or you don't have any sort of ID, then they'll just blacklist you and not associate with you. That should make you skeptical of the extent to which you can even claim that they're independent from the state in the first place. By the way, we're talking about legal firms, which is not the same thing as somebody doing work in their garage, unlicensed and trading with people, not paying revenue, not associating with banks, etc., and actually setting their own policies. Talking about groups like Walmart or Target, who the state has essentially, through various forms of economic intervention, has constructed them and is continuing to make them more centralized in terms of their influence over the market, in order to make you more closely intertwined with a smaller series of financial institutions, and also to make it easier to track your finances. Also, it means increasingly that your source of revenue is dependent upon something that is controlled by political authority, by the state. Also, that more of your revenue goes to the state, because you're more dependent upon these institutions. It's a real eye opener for the people who either argue the so-called vulgar libertarian position, as Kevin Carson puts it, where they defend Walmart because Walmart's private and therefore property rights, and but it shows you that that there's a difference between legally private and something that is actually a just form of property.
All right. Now, I was going to say something, but I can't quite remember what I was going to.
I think that it's not something that, like, just watching this, that is something that they'll be able to sort of inherently take away. You could use this to make that point pretty easily.
Oh, I think I remember now. So this segment alone is going to be a pretty good dividing line or a pretty good litmus test for who the people that are principled or could be principled versus who the vulgar libertarians are, depending on what their reaction is. You're either going to get, oh my goodness, this is so terrible that these people, as a result of not having citizenship, are not able to get into this, or the other reaction is, oh my goodness, I can't believe the state bars people from doing these things. What the hell? And I think it's going to be very telling what their reaction is.
I cannot wait to put up that essay that I've been working on, legalization versus freedom, because it's going to go over this in greater detail.
Oh god, that's gonna piss off a lot of people. Anyways, I'm just gonna go ahead and hit continue.
And statelessness exists everywhere. It's not a problem in a far-off land. It's happening in countries like yours.
It's not a problem. It's only a problem because the state has made it illegal for them to participate in society.
It's a problem because they have to essentially live in squalor, and the conditions that they're illustrating are a direct product of the state's influence over society, and the state constructing these barriers to entry that stop them from being able to actually live their lives and obtain resources that they would need to be prosperous.
All right, one moment.
Or mine.
Oop.
That's a problem.
You might.
I was just trying to play it.
I.e., that's a problem created by the state. It's not something that making more people citizens is going to solve. As a matter of fact, if we were going to, follow the state's role in society to its logical conclusion of just infinitely trying to create debt so that it can expand its influence more, if that wasn't inherently sustainable, the sort of conditions that they're showing would basically be the kind of living standards that citizens have. Because how prosperous you are eventually would just be determined by how much clout you have within the state.
All right, well, now I'm going to hit play.
You mightn't even have heard of statelessness. I hadn't, and I was staggered to learn of the devastating impact that statelessness has on families all around the world.
You hear that? I was devastated to hear about the staggering effect it has on families. All of that useless, mealy-mouthed, emotional appeal drivel. There's nothing really much else to say about that. I just always find it fun to point it out whenever I detect it. I mean, once you realize what they're trying to do in terms of emotional manipulation, not only is it ineffective, but you start to realize that it's basically everywhere in their appeals. Now, I understand the purpose of emotional appeals. It's a rhetorical tactic. It's a rhetorical tactic of persuasion, and it can be very useful for making a argument and convincing people to your point of view. However, when you're trying to make a case as to why statelessness is a problem, you're necessarily going to have to, make an actual case. I don't know. You have anything to say, or should I continue?
Not really. I think we should continue.
All right.
So, how does this happen? In the chaos of fleeing war, families can leave or lose the papers that are proof of ties to a country, and that can make registering the birth of a child impossible, leaving them stateless. Or borders can change or dissolve completely, for example, after the fall of the Soviet Union.
War is a result of war is a result of states, monopolies on arbitration competing with one another for geography.
They're not even hiding it. It's just these political problems caused this. Therefore, we need political solutions. I was saying earlier.
Yeah. Sorry, I just got distracted for a bit. Anyways,
Okay. I was wondering, did my internet just fucking cut out? God damn it!
no, not yet. Anyways, I'm just gonna
Right.
hit continue.
And in some countries, if your parents are stateless, so are you. It's passed on for generations. Other countries
Talking
prevent
about it like
parents
it's a
passing-
disease.
I hadn't considered that. In that case, where do I sign up? Can I catch statelessness too? Please?
I don't.
on their nationality if their child is born abroad. Some countries discriminate against women and don't let mothers pass on their citizenship. Ethnicity, language, religion, they've all been used as excuses to exclude entire groups from being citizens.
I love
Fuck
that
you.
bit. I love that bit they use at the beginning where they're talking about ethnicity and it's a problem about women. It's like ethnic groups are being discriminated.
Think about MUH children.
Kojal donated another $5. Thank you very much. Think about my children.
Yeah, that's usually that's usually the appeals that statists make. And yeah, think about the children because in almost every regard, the state's influence in their lives genuinely makes things a lot worse. And there's no case to argue otherwise, honestly. That's just to what we were talking about here. I totally lost my train of thought. Were you going to say anything, Heretic?
I was going to go into how I find it particularly amusing that at the beginning of the part 3, I think it is, I don't know how they're segmenting it, but they basically made a problem that they're trying to say is about race, about women. It's one of those things where it's like giant meteor destroys the earth, women most affected. It's freaking ridiculous.
And that's the thing that offends me the most, and that's what I was going to say before I lost my train of thought. If anything, it's kind of offensive to suggest that this is a problem of exclusion towards these identity groups. Not if we. I'm not even really making like an interpol argument here. It's just to think of that as exclusion is like, how twisted does your worldview have to be?
I mean, I can tell you with absolute certainty that this is trying to appeal to SJWs and just that whole progressive crowd of identitarians. You're going to see this you're going to see this a lot more very soon. So should I just hit play?
State excluding people to live in squalor. It's like, get the consequences of Jim Crow laws. We need more Jim Crow laws.
Exactly.
That's almost what this is.
Language,
No, that's what
religion,
this is.
they've all been used as excuses to exclude entire groups from being citizens. More than 3/4 of all the people known to be stateless are minorities. Rohingya Muslims of Myanmar, Roma communities around the world.
Minority just being a stand-in for a black person, essentially.
Pretty much. Everyone. It's funny because every group in the world is a minority somewhere.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I was getting at. Is it's weird that especially in countries where that's not accurate, they're still describing them as minorities.
And I paused it here because Roma is a politically correct way to say gypsies. And I would dare you to find Europeans who are sympathetic to gypsies. So I'm curious who this is even going to appeal to, aside from ignorant Americans who might have never heard of the Roma.
Yeah, that's interesting because I honestly hadn't heard that term before, to be perfectly honest.
I have. It's been emerging from time to time as a more politically correct way to say gypsy, because gypsy
I'm
is kind
sure
of a loaded term.
just hearing you describe it, I'm pretty sure that's rampant in like European state propaganda, and I just cannot stand watching European state media. It's I get just like grossed out by it. It's how propagandistic it is. I should probably feel the same way about like American state media, but I need something in order to build my context of what for what the normies are talking about.
Hmm. And I've had that same reaction. Like the way European mainstream politics is described is actually, I find it absolutely revolting. I don't even know like how they can stand to. I don't even know how they can say all that meaningless drivel, those worthless terms that they always use in every sentence, and not just feel like grossed out. Like I just can't help but think like someone's speaking out loud. They just don't feel the slime coming out of their mouth. Like their inane, meaningless terms should physically manifest as some disgusting thing just oozing out.
Basically, take American politics, like U.S. politics specifically. Canadian politics is very similar to European politics, but just take U.S. politics, incorporate more aspects of life into something that you're constantly being told you're dependent upon the state to have, and that's just what it is, because the state over in these European nations, because a lot of these places are more resource rich and therefore are less dependent on trade revenue in order to in order for their governments to make revenue. Therefore, they can just kind of do whatever the fuck they want to the people living there. This is more Central and Eastern Europe I'm talking about, but
Yeah. And by the way, do you and I count as a minority because we're both anarchists?
I guess that's another thing. Like, why exactly does the minority category specifically describe ethnicity? But back to what I was saying. Like, legitimately, if you have conversations with like normies from European places, or you'll watch their mainstream media talking about politics, you hear a lot of people talking about marauds in the States. That's their kind of response to like anarchists talking about social order, or just people expressing skepticism of of state intervention. That's their response, but like for everything. It's insane to listen to that crap. What about food? How we get food without the government? Like, are you fucking kidding me?
People
You
have
can't.
gotten food for a long time without the government. Well, I'm surprised if you are incapable of conceiving how food could be created without a state. Honestly, I don't feel bad about you potentially starving to death in the absence of a state.
Like, farm it.
But
And
So wait,
The-
does that mean we should make waffle farms? I'm not kidding. This is a poll I remember reading about of school age kids in the UK being asked where their food comes from, and the majority of them honestly believe that waffles grow on waffle farms.
God.
And
Pizza comes from pizza plants.
I mean, I'm not surprised because, well, that's what you get when the government's in charge of education. You get people who just don't know anything. But anyways, I think we should continue.
And others whose families moved generations ago to the country where they now live, but were never acknowledged as citizens. And when I went to Bangladesh, nothing could have prepared me for the depth of suffering that I saw amongst the Rohingya refugees. Stripped of citizenship in Myanmar nearly 4 decades ago, they have faced discrimination, persecution, and exile ever since. So, what can we do for law?
What can we do? Well, the first thing you should do is get the government to stop existing, because then all the legal barriers that the state has imposed upon them just won't exist. And then they'll actually be able to participate in the larger economy. That should be at least your starting point. Even if you don't. Sorry.
Okay, if you honestly cared about the suffering that or so-called suffering, I personally I don't think a lot of these people. I think that they're just showing like particularly like war-torn areas of the world and trying to project that onto what statelessness is like. But a lot of the top tourist writers like Wally Conger, the guy who helped edit the New Libertarian Manifesto, are living statelessly. Don't have IDs or anything, and they're not particularly suffering. So that's how people make ends meet through living stateless is by count. They're essentially like they're counter economizing for to live essentially. But if you want, so what we really should be saying is, if you want resources if you genuinely cared and wanted resources to be more accessible to these people, well, then you would be promoting counter economics and actively subverting the very system that excludes these people from the resources that they're trying to obtain.
And which is why I think they're trying desperately to get these people to enter the white market so they can become good corporate slaves and good loyal taxpayers. And there's really nothing else to it. Anyways, let's see what sort of policy prescriptions this I don't know, what would be a good disparaging name for her? Charlatan, fraud, slave driver. I'm gonna go with slave driver.
Lawmakers and courts, we say you have the power to challenge and change the laws that lead to statelessness. More and more countries are signing up to the conventions that aim to end statelessness. In some situations, it can be complex. It can take time, effort, and paperwork. In others, it takes a few words or the stroke of a pen to give people the rights they deserve.
To give people the rights they deserve. As though
That's
it were
another
something
thing.
as though it were something for politicians to just bestow upon people. You could just give people rights that they didn't have previously, or you can just get the government to stop existing and get them out of the way.
Pretty prevalent in U.S. politics as well, but that's something that it bothers me the extent to which that's prevalent in European politics. Like that's another thing you'll hear in European politics a lot is everything being framed as a right, and a right being something that only the government can give you. No, they're not even something that the government gives you. They're something that you have.
All the government can ever possibly do is get in the way and victimize you. And the fact that rights exist at all is how we even know that the state is victimizing people in the first place. So the fact is, you have rights to begin with, and the government can't bestow rights; they can't protect your rights either. So the government is only, even in their own narrative, is not only a direct cause, but is also a direct impediment to these so-called stateless groups' abilities to participate in the local economies everywhere except a local economy.
Shall we continue?
Yeah, sure. The video's almost over anyway.
Give
In time.
children the chances and opportunities in life they so richly need. Either way, it's a man-made problem that we can solve. Let's do so.
Goddamn right
because
it is.
everyone has the right to belong.
That's the one thing this video got right. It is a man.
You cut out. Hello? Yeah, it sounds like SO's internet cut out. But yeah, it absolutely is a man-made problem. The only reason that this is even an issue, quote unquote, in the first place is because the state created a class of people called citizens who they arbitrarily deemed to have a certain select special privileges that they're going to arbitrarily call rights. They aren't rights. Rights, of course, are privileges to be able to participate either in the state or to participate in their partitioned out little white market. And
Yeah,
from
exactly
that,
as I was saying before the stream started, I knew that my internet was going to probably cut out sometime during the stream. God, I fucking hate that.
well, we can hear you
Honestly.
now, so
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt what you were saying, but I was essentially done with what I was, stating, but essentially what they're claiming is true, but not for the reason, that they intended. It absolutely, the problem, so-called, that statelessness imposes upon people, at least according to this video, can indeed it can indeed be solved, but through counter-economic means. And that's something that I'm surprised neither of us have said thus far, is that the entire video is just showing people living in mud huts and in Red Cross tents, obviously from war-torn countries, but they aren't actually describing war being specifically a product of what created that. They're just saying statelessness created that and extrapolating that onto everyone who is living statelessly, as though everyone who is living statelessly is living like that, but they didn't actually claim that. Oh,
hello. Yeah, sorry, I got distracted again.
okay, but
Yeah,
yeah, so this entire video is it's incredibly disingenuous framing. It's like that North Korean propaganda video that came out in 2013, where they were showing clips of hurricane disaster relief, following, I think, Hurricane Ike, and they tried to claim, look at how Americans live.
oh yeah, the North Korean state is particularly hilarious for the extent to which they'll take footage out of context, to the point where they even took a cutscene from Modern Warfare 3 of jets firing missiles at a skyscraper, and they took that as propaganda of what the North Korean military is doing to the United States.
that is, you gotta send me that after the stream is done.
If I can find it again, but this is a long time ago, so
Oh man, I gotta yeah, we should watch I almost am considering if we don't have a subject to cover, we should just watch North Korean propaganda on for some episodes of the stream. Would you guys in chat like that?
That would be. Well, let's see what they think. But unfortunately, the chat is like a 10-second delay, so it might be a little bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I need to really catch up on my what do they call their state media station?
Oh, I don't remember.
Yeah, there's like an abbreviation for it. It doesn't have anything to do with Pyongyang, but yeah, I need to catch up on what they're reporting.
All right, so
it's
it sounds like everyone's saying yes. So I would say, yeah, people do want to have us, or people do want us to watch North Korean propaganda.
we might do that on the next stream now, honestly.
All right.
If we could find a translated version, because that's a problem that I found with a lot of the rips of the of the state media station for North Korea, is that a lot of them don't have subtitles. So we might have to look around a bit, make sure that we can. I don't know about Heretic, but I assume that neither of us can speak Korean.
No, I can't. I know only one language. So, anyways, yeah, we gotta wrap up the stream right now because Friday's stream is gonna be short. And I do have some bad news. We are gonna do a Tuesday stream, but due to something come up for me, so I'm not gonna be able to do a full stream on Tuesday.
That's fine, because if we're just laughing at North Korean state propaganda, then I don't really know if that's particularly pressing. We can just kind of stop the stream at any time.
Yeah, that's true. So, anyways, yeah, everyone, thanks for stopping by, and we'll go ahead and see you next time. And thanks to everyone who donated. Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And
bye.
It helps us out tremendously, and it helps, bring libertarianism to the mainstream. Anyways,